You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and coming hot off the heels of the final divisional round playoff game between the Bills and the Ravens, it is time to sit down, take a look back, and react on this past weekend's slate of games, talk about the losers and just where they stand going into their offseason now, and for all the winners that have found their way into the championship games for next week. I invite you all to comment down below. I would love to hear from you all, your thoughts, your opinions, your takeaways from this past weekend slate of games. How are you feeling about these championship matchups? We have ourselves an NFC East clash in the NFC Conference Championship, and then on the AFC side, it's a matchup we have seen time and time again where Josh Allen will go into Arrowhead to take on the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift, and all those Swifties out there in the middle of the country. So fire away. Let me hear from you all. But first, we will start, and we'll go in order as the games happened, with the Texans going into Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. The Texans will look at the losers first. If you're upset about the flags and everything with Patrick Mahomes and a couple of the penalties that the Texans got in this game, I'll start off by saying I get it. I understand where the frustrations are coming from. This is unfortunately just the way things seem to work in the NFL. The top quarterbacks are always going to get the calls when it comes to those split-second bang-bang judgment type of calls. And it's one of those things that the rules committee, I guess, just needs to look at as far as it being reviewable and maybe having somebody from up top go, hey, that wasn't a penalty type of situation. I don't know what the answer is, but if you think something needs to be done, I think there's a very fair conversation for that. As for the actual game itself, though, I think that the issues of the Texans lie much further than just a couple of penalties that you probably disagree with from the game. You look at the special teams failures from the missed field goal in the first half to ultimately having the other field goal blocked in the second half that basically sealed the Texans' fate in here. You cannot win if you're losing in one of the three facets of the game, especially when it comes to special teams there, and that was a big issue for Houston. But on top of that, the biggest thing that really stuck out to me, and it was pretty blatantly obvious, and it's been something that I have talked about on this show for a large portion of the season, especially towards the back half when it really started getting apparent that there are some O-line issues that the Texans need to address going into this offseason, allowing 8 sacks in this game here. CJ Stroud was sacked 4 times or more 8 different times this season. That is a ridiculous number when you cut it down, and that is just not conducive of winning football. The O-line needs to be addressed, and of course, the injuries to the wide receiver room. In an ideal world where injuries do not happen in the NFL, you're the Texans coming in with a wide receiver room that looks like Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, and a high-flight offense that is taking so much pressure off of Joe Mixon. He's slicing and dicing defenses because they're so concerned about what the wide receiver room is able to do. There was a lot of things that went into this loss here with Houston. I don't really think you can pin it down on just one thing. It's an unfortunate reality of a grueling and long NFL season and just issues that cropped up pretty early on in the year, because I believe CJ Stroud got sacked 8 times in a game that was within the first 4 or 5 games of the season. I forget when the first time it popped up, but it was pretty early in the year, and it just never really seemed to get corrected. So there is some room for improvement with Houston. Yeah, you made it to the divisional round. You won yourself a playoff game. This is a step in the right direction, and I think that this team will continue to build upon that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how Houston competes going forward. On the other side, though, the Chiefs, I mean, I think the biggest thing really with them right now is that they just quite simply can do no wrong offensively. And what I mean by that is that this team has now gone 8 straight games without turning the football over. I believe their last turnover was week 11 when they lost to Buffalo. Since that point in time, no fumbles, no interceptions. They're not giving the football away. Even if the offense isn't necessarily putting up a ton of points, one of the best things that you can do is protect the football and not give your opponents opportunities, or extra opportunities, I should say, to take that football, go down the field and score. And the Kansas City Chiefs have done just that. The offense is far from perfect. It feels a little stuck in the mud sometimes. They got themselves a tall task with a Buffalo Bills team that is coming in hot next week into Arrowhead. But if their offense continues to at least play safe and not give the football away, you cannot count this Kansas City Chiefs team out. And the story of the team, in my eyes, really is that defense, and I think a lot of people would agree with me there. As you looked at 8 more sacks in this game here, 3 coming from George Karlaftis, who also had 3 tackles for loss as well. Trent McDuffie had 3 passes defensed here. When you go back to the draft where those 2 guys came out of, both of those guys being first-round picks, you want to talk about making moves and absolutely nailing them. You got an all-pro in Trent McDuffie. You have George Karlaftis, who is just unrelenting with his physicality on the defensive line. This team is unbelievably stacked from top to bottom. And again, they might not be the most efficient team on offense, but they are the most efficient, in my eyes, football team, from the coaching staff to the players that they have on the football field. They come up big in those moments where it matters most. You saw the blocked field goal late in that game that ultimately sealed the fate of the Houston Texans here. This team is as primed and as ready as it's ever been to make a trip back to the Super Bowl, and it's going to be in Arrowhead. Josh Allen and the Bills have their work cut out for them, but in my eyes, it feels like this Chiefs team might be on the fast track to making history and three-peating as champions. Moving out of that game, though, the other Saturday matchup, one of the highlights of this entire playoff altogether. The Commanders going into Detroit to take down the Lions 45-31 in a game where defense came at a premium, and at some points it kind of felt like the defenses forgot they were supposed to be on the football field. Ultimately, the defensive injuries, I would argue, definitely caught up with the Lions in this game here. There was definitely another factor as well, but this is obviously something we want to talk about. You saw the way the defense has played over the last month and a half or so. 4 of their last 6 games, they allowed over 30 points. This was eventually going to happen. And I even said this a few weeks ago. I forget what team it was that they played where they beat them, but I was like, this is the type of game that you're not going to get away with when you're playing against teams that are actually good and competitive and can play up to your level. And the Commanders did absolutely just that. The real issue, though, of course, stems from the Jared Goff turnovers in this game here, where he had 3 interceptions and a fumble as well. This reminded me of that 5 interception game that he had earlier in the season, and Washington did not let them get away with that as well. This is one of those things where it's crazy, because you have 2 really glaringly ugly games from Jared Goff this season, where he had the 5 interception game where they still managed to beat, the Texans they were playing in that one. And then of course you have this game as well, where he has 3 interceptions and a fumble, so 4 total turnovers on the game. But sandwiched in between those 2 games, and on the outside of those 2 games as well, you have basically stellar performances throughout. Yeah, there's a couple other games where Goff has a pair of interceptions in 2 other games that he played in, but for the most part, he's been phenomenal. But talk about cracking a bit under pressure. Some just really bad choices when it comes to the throws that he made there. And a lot of people are pointing to the Jamison Williams interception, the play that, they were down by 10. Why are you going to go for that play? I mean, Jared Goff, when you look at that situation, was already 3 turnovers deep into that game. You're kind of in a desperation mode at that point, where I'm not saying you can't trust Jared Goff in that situation, but I actually understand where Dan Campbell is coming from. This is, you are emptying the playbook here. You're speaking with Ben Johnson on the sideline, I'm assuming, and if I'm Dan Campbell, I'm going, whatever you got in there, we need it right now. I understand it's a crazy trick play to be going with, and a lot of people seem to disagree with it. I'm not saying it was right or wrong in that situation, but I'm saying I at least understand where he's coming from when you're looking in a situation that your quarterback is already 3 turnovers deep and had 1 more still in his back pocket as well. I at least get where he was coming from there. I'm also curious about just the lack of attempts rushing for Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, only 14 carries, despite the fact that he was averaging 7.5 yards per attempt in this game. Just some head-scratching stuff, I would say. It'll be interesting to see where Detroit goes from here. Obviously, it sounds like both of their coordinators are going to be departing this offseason as Ben Johnson goes to get himself a head coaching gig, and Aaron Glenn has become a very popular choice as a defensive-minded head coaching option as well. So there's going to be a lot of turnover, and we're going to really see this Dan Campbell regime get put to the test in my eyes. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this team evolves under him, because what we've at least gotten from the Lions over the last 4 years of Dan Campbell has been a very competitive, very feisty team that maybe has come up short after building mile-high expectations. But the way I see it now, this team is built from the roster to the coaching staff and to the decision-making that's coming out of the front office as well to succeed for the long haul. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the replacements look like. I'm not too worried about Detroit. I definitely think this loss really hurts, but it's one that I do think Detroit gets past, and they're going to continue to be a force for at least the foreseeable future within the NFC with just how much talent they have in that building. On the flip side, though, the winners, the Washington Commanders, Jaden Daniels is QB1 from this draft class. I'm sorry to the Bears fans. I'm sorry to the Patriots fans. I don't need more than a year to see what we have going on here. Jaden Daniels, for all the flack that he got, and we talked about this, I believe, last week as well, about being too skinny, about being a college-style quarterback. He's not running a pro-style offense in Washington. His decision-making, his calmness, his coolness under pressure, his ability to just maintain poise is something that you quite simply cannot teach football players. You either have it or you don't. And Jaden Daniels is just Joe Cool. When you think of a guy like him, like that is what you're looking at here with Jaden Daniels. The moment has never felt too big for him at any real point in this season. We have seen it a multitude of times. You look back to like the Hail Mary against Chicago. There's just never been a situation where it felt like things were getting away from Jaden Daniels. And in a game where the world expected you to lose this football game going up against a juggernaut like Detroit, you not only go in and win, but you lead your offense to a 45-point monster against one of the best teams in the NFL. You beat the opposing team by 2 scores as well. I cannot stress enough just how impressed I have been with what Jaden Daniels has done this year. And then you look at some of the other guys on this team that have just been contributing at an awesome level. Diami Brown deserves a ton of credit for the way he has played as the Robin to Terry McLaurin's Batman during these playoffs, with nearly 200 total yards this postseason so far and a touchdown to boot as well. You got on the defensive side another rookie that I think definitely needs a shout out here in cornerback Mike Sinistril, who had 2 interceptions. I hope I'm saying his last name right, by the way, but had 2 interceptions in this game. On top of that, the running game has looked extremely good with Austin Eckler back. You're splitting between Brian Robinson and him, and they have just been fantastic compliments, not only to each other, but to what Jaden Daniels is doing as well. This Commanders team is a force, and it's unbelievable to think that literally a year ago at this time, this Commanders team was sitting at home, not sure of what the quarterback situation was going to be. I don't even think they had their head coach settled yet, because Dan Quinn was one of the last head coaches to be hired during the coaching hiring cycle last year. And they were primed to pick a new quarterback essentially at the number 2 spot in the draft. You look at them, and you can compare them to a team like the Patriots, who were literally picking 1 spot later than they were in that same draft. And it was like 2 polar opposites. You had a team go basically back to the same place this year, where the other one is literally playing in the NFC Championship against a division rival for a shot to play in the Super Bowl with a rookie quarterback who has an opportunity to make history as potentially the first rookie quarterback to win a Super Bowl game. There is so much to love about this Washington Commanders Cinderella run right now, and I'm not even mad that I got this game wrong. I actually went 1-3 this week in picks, and I don't even care, because I had so much fun watching all of these games. The Chiefs and Texans one was a bit of a drag, but the other 3 games were so much fun and so worth the time that I spent watching all these football games. I'm not even mad. So excellent job by Washington. If you're a Commanders fan and you feel like your team can go all the way, I honestly think it's rightfully so, because this team is on fire. Looking into Sunday's games, Los Angeles going into Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, but ultimately falling 28-22. Great effort by a team that nobody really, especially I would definitely say most people, did not expect to be here at the start of the season. You look at the departure of Aaron Donald, a lot of changing going on within that defense there. There's a lot of people that don't expect much from this team, I would say, at the beginning of the season, but especially the way the early portion of the season started as well. They were banged up with injuries, losing games. I mean, they got demolished, what was it, week 2 or 3 by the Arizona Cardinals, letting 40 points in a game just get dropped on them. So there was a lot. But this team came in, and in my preview, I said it's impossible to stop Saquon Barkley, but you had to at least slow him down. And unfortunately, 205 yards and an 8.5 yard per attempt average is not slowing Saquon Barkley down. It was one of those games where you had to be willing to bend but not break, and that 78-yard run that he had at the end of the game was basically the break and snapping point for this defense. And it's a shame because when it came to defending the pass, they were a pretty damn good unit. The pass rush racking up 7 more sacks. They've been a menace all season long with a lot of young, really good players on that defensive front. It was mistakes, Philly's defense capitalizing on said mistakes and or forcing the offense into those mistakes and just forcing Matthew Stafford into some errant throws, especially on that final drive. The pressure was on, and this was a team that clearly overachieving, that is not quite ready to get over the hump. This is another team that I look at, tough way to go out, similar to like the Texans, but a team that is so young, especially on the defensive side. Matthew Stafford, I would argue, is still as good as he has been at any point in his career. He can still be a leader for that team, and that defense is only going to get better with more experience. So I like where the Rams stand right now. Yeah, it's a tough loss in Philadelphia, and you had an opportunity late to potentially win that game, but it is what it is. Still a great run by Los Angeles, all things considered, from the way the season started to where they ended up. And then the Eagles, it's unfortunate that you can't use the playoffs to help push the narrative for who should be winning MVP. If you still think that it's Josh Allen, I totally understand that. But every single week that has gone by, Saquon Barkley has made it a point to remind everyone who the most valuable player in the league is right now, and I firmly think it is him. It's unfortunate that the MVP award has turned into one of those quarterback awards that it can't really be anyone else besides a running back. I'm hoping, like, there's a piece of me that is like holding on to like a tiny bit of hope that maybe the voters decide to lean to Barkley and give him the award, and maybe it's like a very tight race, or like maybe he and Josh Allen split the voting or something like that, and we get 2 MVPs, whatever it may be. I think he deserves it. And that 78-yard touchdown run that I mentioned earlier, I think is a perfect representation of just how big of a season he's had, how instrumental he has been to the turnaround of Philadelphia. If we all go back to the beginning of this season, I think it was very clear coming into the year, everyone looked at Nick Sirianni as a head coaching candidate that was going to be fired at some point this season. And when the Philadelphia Eagles fell to 2-2, the noise was loud. But as the team got better, as they continued to lean into Saquon Barkley, and it felt like each and every single week he was getting better and better and better, this guy deserves an award. And Offensive Player of the Year, in my eyes, is just simply not enough for the work that he has put in helping turn this Philadelphia Eagles team around. That crash and burn at the end of last season, and people were out on the head coach for the entirety of the offseason and well into the first month of this regular season this year. So I cannot state it enough. Barkley deserves an MVP award. The rest of the team, though, got to get into this as well. In my eyes, the other story is going to be the defensive turnaround. This is, again, a unit that at the end of last season fell apart. One of the worst in rushing yards allowed during the back half of the season. They could not stop a nosebleed through the air as well. You go through the offseason, you see some of the additions that they made here, and drafting some young guns that have become literal building blocks in pieces for this defense here. The stat total is ridiculous. 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. You had 10 passes defensed. You had 2 takeaways on top of that. It is unbelievable, the turnaround. And it's funny because I think you look at how last season ended, And I remember reading this online and seeing the people that were poking fun at the Eagles for always going after big school, big name players in the draft. And how's that working out for you? Well, fast forward a year, and we are now looking at a team that has those big school, big name guys, and they're a literal monster of a defensive unit, and it all starts with Jalen Carter in the middle of that defensive line. He is a literal wrecking ball for offensive lines over the middle there. And then when you look at the guys like Quinyon Mitchell, like Cooper DeJean that they brought in this offseason as rookies, the moment has never felt too bright for them. They have continued to step up each and every single week, and they are playing instrumental parts to this defense as well. You have a guy like Zach Bond who was brought in, and he has been turned into a literal all-pro at the linebacking position. I mean, there's just so much to like about what this Philadelphia Eagles team is doing. And if I had to pick a singular defense in the NFC to stop what the heck the Washington Commanders have brewing over there right now, it would have to be this Philadelphia Eagles defense. And we are like, talk about irresistible force meeting an immovable object for my wrestling fans out there that are about to go head to head next week for the NFC Championship game and the right to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. Vic Fangio has his work cut out for him, but I know he's going to have his guys ready, and we are in for one hell of an NFC clash next week, and I'm really looking forward to the NFC East duel. It's going to be a good one. And again, that Philadelphia Eagles defense, if you're not talking about the story of Saquon Barkley this year on offense, it's got to be the defensive turnaround that this team has made throughout the large majority of this season, because they ended last year in a severe rut, and this is a completely different unit at this point. And then finally, last but certainly not least, the way we wrapped up the divisional round. I'm so happy that Sunday's games were as fun and exciting as they were, and even the Saturday night game as well between Washington and Detroit here. The wild card was definitely, I don't want to say a letdown, but not nearly as entertaining as I would have liked it to be. This was clearly quality football teams. Everyone deserved to be in the position that they were in my eyes, and it led to just so many fun contests. And we got weather games on Sunday. You got really fun games on Saturday too, for the most part. But Baltimore and Buffalo for the right to challenge the Chiefs in Kansas City, coming down to the literal wire. We'll start with the Ravens here, and just an absolute tragic end to this game for Mark Andrews. I genuinely feel for him, because you have the fumble that ultimately led to Buffalo kicking 3 for 3 and going up to 27 points. And then, of course, dropping the game-tying 2-point conversion as well. This is one of those things where I'm sure it goes without even saying here, but I know his teammates are going to have to be there for him, because that's one of those things where that's probably not going to leave his mind for some time. So I genuinely feel for Mark Andrews in that situation there. And I mean, you could not ask more of Lamar Jackson when it mattered most, especially on that drive to score to put yourself within 2 from Buffalo. I mean, you want to talk about extending plays, finding guys that are open and getting the ball to where it needed to go. Just excellent performance from Lamar Jackson. And I hate that you had to choose between one of these two teams to get to the AFC Championship, because both of these teams, in my eyes, it's like a crime. They deserve to be in that same spot, but then you have a team like the Chiefs that's also there as well. And we're spoiled, especially with the way the AFC works right now, with guys like Lamar Jackson leading Baltimore, with Josh Allen leading Buffalo, with Patrick Mahomes leading Kansas City. CJ Stroud is on the come up in Houston right now. You, of course, have Joe Burrow, and if the Bengals could just find a way to put a defense together, like, the AFC is just littered with incredible quarterbacking talent, and it makes the AFC side of things, in my eyes, just so entertaining when it comes to the playoffs. This game felt as big as any at this point. It felt like an AFC Championship clash. But mistakes are ultimately what cost Baltimore here. You had 3 total turnovers as an offense. Lamar Jackson did have a really tough overthrow that he airmailed his guy, went right to the defensive back. What are you going to do there? Mistakes really cost this team, because you look at the numbers, you outgained Buffalo 416 yards to 273. They had a better third down conversion rate. They were averaging 7.3 yards per play to Buffalo's 4.6 yards per play. Baltimore offensively played, for the most part, minus the turnovers, like if you take out the turnover aspect of it, like overall performed a really good game and better than Buffalo did in the grand scheme of things, at least in terms of yardage and just how much they were getting done. But mistake after mistake, you're not going to get away with that. You also had 5 penalties in this game as well. Baltimore being one of the most, if not, I think the most penalized team in the NFL this season. 5 more penalties, giving up yards here and there as well to Buffalo's just 1. Like, just a lot of mistakes, and this Baltimore team has kind of been prone to them in certain instances here, and this is ultimately going to cost you. Buffalo on the other side, though, Bills get a chance to exercise some demons next week as they go into Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Man, the big one here is definitely the defense and just the amount. And this is funny because this was not really something that I was personally saying, but it's interesting to see how many people are actually saying that Buffalo was simply not big enough and not tough enough to stop the Ravens. I don't know where that narrative came from, and it was interesting to hear it get talked about so much on the broadcast. And full disclosure for those of you who may or may not know, because I don't really discuss this a lot, I'm not really tuned in to NFL media like at all. And that might sound crazy to some people if you're hearing me say this right now. I don't watch or really consume any sorts of sports media. Like, I work in sports media in the New England region, and like that is my job, my daytime job, and then this is my night job or whatever you want to call it. But I spend so much time producing football related content between this show and what I do for actual work that I can't bring myself to sit down and listen to more. Like, there's a few things I'll listen to here and there, but I mean, I can go a whole week without listening to shows and podcasts that are related to like the NFL and just kind of the things that are going on. Like, I'll catch something here or there, or maybe catch some clips on like social media of just like certain takes and whatnot. But I genuinely don't consume a lot of football conversation at all. The conversation I get is basically what I'm spewing to you guys every week and just stuff that I hear about when I'm putting stuff together for content regarding the Patriots and where I work. But that's basically it. So to hear that be like a big narrative for that game and a big storyline for that game, I just thought was really interesting, because for me, when I previewed the game, like my big thing was just, can you slow down Derrick Henry? I never sat there and thought like Buffalo is not big enough to do it. Like, no, this is the NFL. Anything can literally happen. So, and we got just that. Derrick Henry held under 85 yards. For those of you that were not aware, coming into this game, the Ravens were 11-0 when Derrick Henry ran for at least 85 yards or more. So at this point, you hold them to 84, you got yourself a victory. The defense had 3 massive takeaways, a big scoop and run by Von Miller that was earlier in the first half of the game that went for like 40 yards to flip the field, put you in a position to score. You, of course, had the big Terrell Bernard one as well that ultimately led to Buffalo going up 27 to get themselves the win. But, I mean, the way I look at this Buffalo Bills team, they are a balanced... No side of the football is more important than the other in my eyes. Yes, Josh Allen is Superman. He is the guy that leads the offense. He is the engine of that group there, the heart and soul of it. But you also have an excellent running back in James Cook. You have a stable of wide receivers that are extremely impressive at what they do. You might not have like that true legitimate number one yet, because you have some young guys that are emerging, and like a guy like Amari Cooper, who's a little bit older and not quite the number one that he used to be, but you still have capable pass catchers, some studs at tight end, and it all runs through what Josh Allen does. But you have the balance of James Cook out of the backfield and what this offense can do. And then you can rely on your defense in big spots to hang on strong like you did today. Be able to put up a performance where you can stop a guy like Derrick Henry, who rushed for nearly 2,000 yards this season, and hold him to under 100 yards. The balance of this team is the reason that this Bills team is primed and ready for an AFC Championship appearance in Kansas City next week. And Buffalo already has a win over Kansas City. It now comes down to, like I said at the beginning of this when we first started talking about Buffalo, you got to exercise the demons, though. You've got to go in now and beat Kansas City when it actually matters most. It does not matter what happened in the regular season. This game that Buffalo literally just won is a prime example of that. You got absolutely smashed in Baltimore, 35-10 the first time you met this team. Second time around, you played them tough from whistle to whistle, and you got a victory. Does not matter that you kind of ran roughshod on the Chiefs the first time you played them. Buffalo needs to be ready to go next week in Kansas City, and the way this Bills team looks right now, I do think they have a legitimate chance of getting that job done. But those are my thoughts, my reactions, my takeaways from this past weekend's games. Fire away in the comment section. As always, I love hearing from you all. Love chatting with you all down there. Let me hear your takeaways from this past weekend's games. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.